Okay, today's gonna be about space.
It's
Okay.
that's
All right,
kind
Exer,
of.
Exer, relax. I had to restart the
I'm.
recording already. Don't make me do this again. Okay.
Whoa.
So today we're gonna be talking about space. So a lot of you guys, from the way that I've seen you guys play, you guys do not know about how to aggressively take space, how to passively hold space, how to play around space that you've got. Okay. There's a lot of things that kind of involve space, but right now I'm going to be covering the fundamentals and then move into more advanced topics like within the same thing. So let's just really quickly cover the main things. Okay. Why space? Why is it important? Okay. So let me give you an example. Let's say that this is you. You are little Timmy over here filling on Omen. Okay. You're playing. Your team has decided that they're going to plan to push out of A. That's the plan. Simple. They're going to push out into A. You're going to leave your KJ. But all of a sudden, okay, there is a jet with an op. We have now lost our KJ. Okay. Typical, you say to yourself, but whatever. You're still going to move on. You're going to push towards A. That is the plan. Later, you hear turrets down. Okay. As far as you're concerned, there are two threats over here, but you say to yourself, it doesn't matter. We're going to be pushing A regardless. As you guys get prepared to push out of A, somehow, some way, they get two players to push out of here. They manage to lock you guys out there, and they start spamming you with Odin. Okay? As this happens, you guys have nowhere to go, and anywhere that you move, guess what? Op can push up. Now the op has killed your guys. We have anybody that's coming up on B, killing your guys, and anybody that stayed here probably died to the Odin. That's just a strategy that just happened. That's just how it played out. Okay? I wish you could have done something different, but that's just how it played out. What just happened? Well, you guys just got choked out, okay? That's just how space technically tends to work in the game. And this is why you have to look at your map at all times. When you get boxed in, when you have no options, it is very hard for you to do something, and you tend to have to fight your way out of the situation. Okay, it is very easy on maps where you have a lot of space at the beginning. So, for example, you can look at Breeze. You have so much space to work with. It is much harder to get choked out like that, but it is still possible. And this is why you need to look at space and look at how exactly it is that you need to work with it in order to, have more successful games. So now that we understand why it's important, let's talk a little bit about something that I talked about on the Controller 101 class. Again, I will be doing more on that to get more advanced topics. But one thing that I talked about with the Controller class is we need to understand how space is held just technically. Okay, there's two forms. So let's say, for example, we have Omen right here, and he's sending a smoke directly over here to mid. Okay, what he's done just now is he's blocked off this sight line. He now has control of this, right? Simple as. Problem is, he's not there to participate in getting that control, meaning that he is indirectly controlling this. Okay. What about something like Jet? Well, if Jet has an op and Jet is holding this angle right here, Jet is participating in active control. Okay. The best way to think about which kind of control you have is whose sightline is holding that particular angle. Okay. In that same example, let's say that you are holding over here and you decide to put a smoke over there. Okay. That's something you decide to do. What you do is, of course, you block this sightline, but of course, they watch CSGO, they watch Stewie 2K, they push out of this smoke, and they actually want to take this space right here. Okay? In typical fashion, it didn't matter what you did in that inactive form of control, you have lost it. Okay? So when you have to look at what you're doing with your character is whether you're going to be doing active or passive, and whether somebody's going to be working off of your passive control. I've talked about this as well when I was showing Ascent. If you have someone like a KJ, for example, holding over here and then holding this space, you can see that KJ is not necessarily holding the sightline, but they're playing off of the sightline that the turret has. Okay, this is one really common example that you're going to see Sentinels more than not playing somebody's passive angle and then swinging off of it. This is why Sentinels have a really easy time either getting traded or getting trades, because they're already playing a really passive angle to be able to swing from. Okay, how can you do it on something like Jet? How can you do it on something like Initiator? Well, that's a lot harder because your utility doesn't tend to have a lot of prolonged effects on the map. So for example, let's say I wanted to hold a really passive angle. I can throw like a one-way here, and then I can hold that over there. Well, that is an example of you passively taking control of this. Maybe they no longer have control of tiles, or you've segmented tiles, but it is very short, right? Which is why we have to look at roles. Okay. I always like to use Valorant because it's a good way to kind of represent this. So let's talk about the main two that we're going to be talking about for more aggressive angle, holding, not angle holding, and angle contesting agents. Okay. Initiators and duelists are both very similar in the way that they have a really good way of contesting space. Okay. Duelists technically come on top when it comes to taking that space. If you look into the role descriptions, these guys tend to be on top because they have a lot of self-sufficient kits in order to take that space. Okay. If you're going to be playing duelist, you have to make sure that your playstyle matches that of a duelist that's going to take space. In solo queue, in order to be successful with a duelist, you have to make sure that you adapt to the space that's being taken at all times. Okay. And let me explain to you how this works. And this is going to come back later to the initiator. When you look at a map, okay, there's always so many different ways that the map can kind of work. And the way that I explain it to players is that they need to kind of split the map into quadrants. Generally, 9 quadrants is all you really need, but this is how we're going to split it. Okay. We're going to have the space that initially we start with. Okay. The space that attackers initially start with, right? Again, they're not perfect quadrants, and then just the mids. Okay. You're going to notice that there's a huge emphasis in quadrants that have control of multiple lanes, right? So if we were to be naming these quadrants, you can name 1, 2, and 3 the attacker quadrants. And you can name 4, 5, 6 the mid quadrants, with the last 7, 8, 9 as the defender quadrants. If you want to look at it this way or flip it, by me, right? You can do it like this if you want. I mean, whatever it is, as long as you have control of your quadrants, you understand. When you are playing the game, the art of deduction is perhaps your best friend when you're going to get any sort of space. Okay. So a good example of this is, like I said, remember how we were looking at that example on Lotus. If the team decided to push out on A, anybody that's on 9, 8, or 7 knows that these quadrants are now under attack. Okay. And when you're looking at how to react to this, let's say somebody decided to push out of 6, right? If nothing's happening on 6, okay, what do you think is happening on the rest of the map? There's going to be more players, okay? Something as simple as that. Let's keep it simple. Let's say that you're pushing out over here by 1, and you go over here, and you see 0 players. Well, you know that they're on this half of the map, meaning that you do not need this much control to be emphasized. This is why you see players that tend to push out. In fact, I'm going to show you an example of that. Of how like controllers tend to, not controllers, sorry, how players tend to take control on both an attack and on defense. But generally what it is like, if you're seeing a lot of effects going in, like a lot of, like, for example, you see flashes, you see a lot of smokes coming in from one area, a lot of noise, okay? And you confirm that one of the quadrants is basically empty, then you can assume that one half of the map is now just being taken over, whereas the other is completely safe, right? You can use this deduction to kind of get yourself an idea on where they're pushing. Usually there's other telltale signs, like you can look at, hey, are they smoking? Hey, are they doing this or that, right? But that's like the main idea. So when you're looking at a duelist, you want to make sure that you're either A, contesting the main quadrants that are being taken, or you're looking for space where the quadrants are always going to give you more of a chance of winning. So a good example would have been if they're not over here by 4 and it takes too long for you to rotate. One thing that I've seen is, in one of the examples I was going to pull up, Demon 1 just straight up pushes up, okay? And all he does is he's trying to contest his space. He wants to ensure that, the information that they have is not false, okay? So that's one example of things you can do in your games. You want to make sure that you're trying to get, again, as much of that control as possible. When you're playing Duelist, again, when you're playing solo queue, try to make sure that you're trying to contest as much space as possible, but at the same time, do it in a safe way. I find that players, if they find that they're getting attacked, they think that they need to contest this, right? Your job is not to contest space, it's to take space. And if you can't take it directly, then there's no reason for you to go for it. But someone else can contest space. And that's where the initiators come in, okay? Same idea. Understanding the idea of map control in terms of quadrants will help, right? it's usually about what areas are being contested the most. And this is where you have to look at the map differently. Instead of kind of like figuring out, oh, they're going to be within 1, 2, or 3, you can look at what are the main contested areas. They're the middle ones, right? Generally, on like at the beginning of the attack, usually you'll see a lot of flashes going back and front. These two particular angles, right? Same thing here. You're going to see a lot of like darts being thrown around this area. Same thing here. You might see a knife, maybe you see a flash, something of the sort. Okay. When you're playing Initiator, in order for you to be able to properly contest space, you have to look at first points of contact. Okay. First points of contact is usually where you first see an enemy. So, for example, if I was playing Defenders, this would be a first point of contact. This would be one. This would be another. And this would be another. There's 4 different points. Okay. As an Initiator, obviously, I find that most of the time players that struggle to climb with Initiator, they tend to hold onto utility and they die with their entire kit. Okay. I'd rather you, if it's at the beginning of the round and you have someone with you that's going to be pushing off and you are an aggressive player, again, play to your play style, try to make sure that you're contesting these points of contact. And then from there, just kind of use what you know of your elo to kind of work from there. Maybe they like to play here. Maybe they like to play around here. And that's how you play accordingly. So, for example, if you know that they don't like to play out in the open, maybe you just need to dog your teammate and make sure that that's clear before you flash out into tiles, right? However, let's say they know they don't play there. Maybe they haven't even learned there in the first place, and you know they play out here in the open. That's where you can just throw out the flash, right? Make sure you're remembering things that the enemy team does in order to comfortably take that space. Okay, so that's basically how initiators tend to work generally in the grand scheme of things. Okay, you want to make sure that you're contesting angles. Okay, make sure that you're contesting that space with angles. And duelist, you want to make sure that you're taking that space comfortably, right? Make sure that you're able to take this space right here. It doesn't necessarily mean W key. Sometimes it just means pushing up over here with a jet dash. And if they don't push it, if they push you up, you can just dash away, right? That's one good example of how you're contesting space by taking it. Okay. What about the other two? Well, controllers and sentinels are more of area deniers. Okay. They have a lot of area denial. They tend to chop up the map. So, for example, if I was using an Omen, I'd be able to basically do these 2 smokes right there. And notice how I've now isolated this space for me to be able to take over. With a good team, I can now use this isolated space to have full control of 5, and I'd be able to either leak into 6 or into 1, right? Notice how map control can be really essential in controlling the rest of the map, right? Whether you're in like an organized team or not, you guys will always have a plan regarding what exactly you guys want to do with the space that you get. I find that most players, when they try to push up aggressively into like these back areas of spawn, or oops, did not mean to do that. Or when they're trying to take these like really populated areas, they tend to take double lanes. So they tend, for example, to do these splits to make sure that they have as much control as possible, so they have options. Okay. But yeah, that's usually how controllers tend to take space. And last but not least, we have, sentinels. They're pretty easy to kind of use. Remember how I talked about that passive, aggressive. They tend to be doing that simply by just doing really passive control, and then they can just have some more active control somewhere else. And they like to split their focus between multiple lanes, so the team has a good idea of where everything is. Okay, so that's basically how roles tend to take space. And that is how the game tells you to take space, and that is how generally there's a lot of things that you should be doing with your character, and all of them are true. However, that's not how ranked works all the time. That is not how your games work all the time. Maybe you're in a team. That's not how it works all the time. It's not as easy as just pulling Jet out and just taking as much space as possible because it's free. Sometimes it's about understanding what's being taken. Sometimes it's about how you can contest that space back. Okay. We talked about sightlines. We talked about that whole idea. Okay. Now let's talk about a little bit more of an advanced topic, both that works on attack and on defense. Okay. Poking and scaling. Does anyone know what the difference between the two are? And does anyone know what they are just in general? Anyone want to take a guess?
Uh, I think I know what scaling is. I'm not sure what poking is, but I think scaling is when you're like in the middle of the space and like the enemy could try to contest that space while you're scaling up.
That's a good guess. It's partially true. It is actually where you're in a particular area and they will contest it back. It's a heavily contested area. But the one big thing with scaling is that you're taking it very slowly, but you're taking it quietly, right? Scaling is not about throwing flashes and whatnot. It's about you slowly pushing up. Okay. Scaling tends to be done by passive teams. So let's say, for example, you are a Jet and you're a very, very, very passive player. You do not want to step in there. You don't want to run in, right? You don't want to start swinging. You want to wait. Scaling would be just to be ready to kind of take the space that's been given to you. Same thing on defense. Same thing what I showed right here. This pushing up of the Jet is a form of scaling, right? Scaling is really useful for players that really want to make sure that they have control of the map, and it's one of the most effective ways of winning your ranked games. So when I tell players that they're struggling to tell their team what to do, I always try to lead them into kind of working into a more scaling class. Yeah, it's recording. It's recording. But basically, one of the things that's really useful is that scaling is going to help you win more games because most of the time, ranked players, all they want to do is fight. They do not have the patience. So when you give them a lot of noise, they will participate in that noise. They will try to get that fight. However, this is where lurking Reynas come in, right? Obviously, we have a problem with lurking Reynas. We have a problem with like duelists that don't tend to entry. This is where it starts becoming a little bit more problematic. You got to make sure that you can see how your team is playing and whether you're providing usefulness to them. So let's say, for example, I have a problem where I'm always entering and my team is not behind me, right? So that's one example, right? Let's say I'm going in and I'm trying to take that space, but my team is back there. Me providing that space, that aggressive space that works with my playstyle, does not fit with their playstyle. So instead, I can now conform for a more passive playstyle where I scale and only take when they're ready to take. Okay. Another example is maybe a little bit more of an impatient playstyle is what that lurking Reyna does. They instead, what they notice is they'll push into one area, whereas the rest of the team will push into another. The point of sometimes like what happens in scaling on both sides of the map, both attack and on defense, is to get picks. If you get picks, you get space. And if you get space, you have more control of the map that allows you to choke out the enemy. Okay, both attack and on defense will suffer from poor decision making. So I suggest and I encourage you guys to always try to look at as much of that scaling as you can. Okay, so once more, when we're looking at that problem between lurking Reynas, if you're noticing that your team is aggressively pushing and that guy is just taking his time somewhere else, it is maybe time to kind of realize either why they're doing it. They might be doing it because they're having a hard time aggressively pushing. Maybe everybody needs to slow down, or we need to instead conform to a, kind of pushing with them at their pace. It sometimes kind of sucks how you have to revolve your entire team around a particular player or a particular playstyle, but it's the best way to win. And scaling tends to be in the forefront of it. So as long as you understand how scaling works, you'll have an easier time. Okay. Do I have any questions in regards to that? In regards to how like maybe duelists might lurk and why it might happen, right?
I have a question.
Go for it.
If someone's like scaling and taking up space consistently every round, like on like I know the examples like Ascent, right? Like if they're scaling up and taking space, how can you counter that? Would it just be like a default? Like you just like make sure
Yeah,
they don't?
you answered your question perfectly. So regardless of
Okay.
side, obviously, it's a lot easier to default on attack than on defense. But yes, there's two ways of you to kind of default. Obviously, you have like the default where you have players on all side of the map. So you have one on this quadrant, one on this quadrant, one on this quadrant, right? As long as you have a player on all sides of the map, you should be okay. I find that players tend to have a mixture of that. So this is where 4-1s come into play. Are you familiar with notations?
I think so. When there's four on one side of the map and then one on the other side,
Exactly.
and then
Okay.
yeah, okay.
Exactly. So generally it would be something like 4-0-1, but because it's 0, we don't really count it. So it's 4-1. 4-1s and inversely 3-2s are really useful when you are having a hard time combating a very aggressive team. So let's say you are playing a team that only likes to push mains. You rarely see them mid. You can put 3 players towards one side, kind of slowly, kind of taking that space here. And then you can have the other 2 maybe on the weaker side because it's more of a gamble, kind of working on the other side. Same thing on attack. If you know that they've been pushing you guys out, then you guys can leave some players on one side and some players on the other ready to counter that aggression. Okay. It's a perfect place for you to kind of look for that aggression. And this is where that play style matters, right? And that's actually segues into what I was talking about poking. Okay. How do you think poking works? Does poking always work for scalers? What does poking really even mean? Okay. Does anyone have an answer for that? What poking even means?
Like, can I like do like an example?
Yeah, go for it.
So like if Jet is in quadrant one and wants to, and like the rest of the team or like its default
Mhm.
and wants to like contest for four, but not like fully, it's kind of like poking to see how like they'll react and like get information on where people are.
Mm-hmm. So it wait. So it would just be everybody's on their own lane, and you're waiting for a response, or you're pushing up. Wait, what was that?
Waiting for a response.
Okay, waiting for a response. So you were almost there. Okay,
I
you were
think I
almost
think
there.
I have a I think I have an idea as well.
Okay,
Like kind of like what she was saying, but like instead of just like waiting for like passively for space, maybe like a jump spot or something, like really quickly checking if there's anybody there, and then and then whatever you get from that information, you can decide after what you're gonna do.
that's pretty good. Yeah, both of you guys just together, you guys completed like the answer. So poking is something that we're about to notice. I'm gonna give you guys an example of this. Okay, so we're gonna be looking at this example between two different teams. Okay, we're gonna be looking at NRG and C9. This actually happened today. Okay, and I'm gonna give you an example of how that space and all of that kind of works together and how poking tends to work. Okay, poking does try to get a reaction, but it's done in a more active way. It is for players that are aggressive, but they can't really take that space because either they have ops or they're playing really well or your team is really passive. So it's kind of like that middle ground for players that still want to stay active in the game, but can't for some reason. Okay. So we're going to be looking that 4-1 we were talking about. They want to maintain space over on B main while they're still maintaining space on A main, right? You're going to notice that on the opposite side, we have a team that is more aggressive. We have somebody that's being sent out. That's Demon 1. Demon 1 is going to push out. This is an example of that aggressive playstyle that I was talking before, okay? And I was going to talk more of aggressiveness, but like I said, he's taking space. This is what he does to take space. Whether you call this a timing, whether you call this getting lucky, whether you just call this pushing up, whatever, he's taking space. And that's something he took.
Deep smoke, a flash.
Notice how on the other side, however, notice how they're poking, okay? They have a wall and they have this little orb right here, okay? I believe both are active at the same time right now. And what's happening is by creating this wall right here, not wall, by putting this smoke right here, it basically puts pressure on anybody that could be holding here to essentially get a reaction. So essentially if they're there, they might hold this kind of cross right there, right? They're trying to get some response. And you're going to notice how their immediate response to that is to bait them out.
Flash, nothing found. Demon 1 with blades. He's alone here.
And then they flash. Okay? If you didn't quite catch it, I'm going to do it again.
We've talked smoke, a flash, nothing found. Demon 1 with blades. He's alone here. We've talked.
Right? Notice how using poking can be a really effective tool for catching people off guard. So you can do this with pre-fires. You can do this by throwing a flash around the corner and maybe just swinging after it, not with the intention of really winning the fight, but pushing them off. An example of something like throwing a molly at one of these main areas to make sure that they stay off that angle. That is a good example of what you can do for poking, right? You're staying in your area, but you're slowly scaling. You're combining it with scaling usually to get a reaction from the opponent, try to draw their fire, try to draw something from there, and maybe get a location on who it is that's playing that angle.
Talked so much about how good Ethan and
Notice how they're pre-firing angles, right? He just took that shot for no reason. We don't know who's back there, but they're just taking the angle.
Him up. This
right?
is a solo mission.
They're just poking.
From beginning to end, and you can see
and you're going to notice that this is a really good example of scaling, whereas on the other team, they understand that the team is playing slow. And if they die, they lose all that space. And so they're using this little space over here, and they're playing quietly. They're playing passively.
and he's still in spawn. He
Which
knows.
is a piece of advice I was going to add, but might as well say that.
There's gonna be something, and there's the flash. Did he get
Right?
behind it? No,
Poking
he didn't.
again,
But
checking
the thing
mid.
Is, it could be top mid. It could be right next to him, and that's exactly
waiting
where he
for that
is.
B.
Surely he spotted him at this point.
And they get a free kill. Okay? On one of the best players that we currently know. Free. Right? Just simply by waiting, playing passively, playing to their strengths. Okay? That's basically what's happening, and that's where poking really comes in. Okay. And of course, I was going to talk about aggressive space, but I think Demon 1 already showed a really good example. Sometimes you just can't push up. Sometimes you have to just make that risk. Okay. High risk, high reward. Okay. I see that a lot of players, for example, do examples of what I'm about to show right here. I think it's this one. You're going to see right here, you're going to see the Jet pushing up with a teammate.
They're so prepped for this map. This is wild.
And you're going to see the Jet.
It's not very
with
often
an
you
op,
see a solo Jet as well.
slowly lurking up.
You would imagine they
They're
commit
just pushing
to this
up,
here,
they're
but
taking
Victor
that
plays
space.
smart.
They now have a
Right,
flank.
He almost got that kill.
And they got one of their guys right there. If you are looking to be a more aggressive player on attack and on defense, you have to make sure that you're comfortable with getting shot anywhere. Usually, ask for help. Use a flash. Do something for your that your teammate can give you, right? Look for initiators that can help you contest that space. Maybe a smoke that can help you split up sightlines. But most of the time, when you're pushing out and your team doesn't know what they're doing, you have to be comfortable with that. If they're not giving you that help, there's no reason for you to stay that long. But here, they gave him help. He pushed up. With knives, he probably felt really comfortable taking those fights just because he has that mobility, so he took that risk. Okay, that's what aggressive players do. So let's finish up with some final things that I need to add. So timings, perfect time to create space. I'm gonna give you guys the answers just straight up. There usually is a pretty good idea of when you should be taking space. When you look at the map, you look at the quadrants. Okay. Usually you can get a really decent idea where the enemy is. You can have misreads because the enemy managed to trick you just right. But most of the time, it's pretty simple and it's pretty straightforward. Most of the time, you can split the map in half. And looking at this quadrant, at the quadrants that I've kind of put in, there's either going to be an A leaning side or a B leaning side, where the attack is kind of either coming from or where the defense is mostly the strongest. Okay? The perfect time to take space doesn't really occur. Usually it just kind of happens. Timings do occur when you're playing, and I'm going to be showing you guys some movement tips that you guys can use when you're traversing, when you're pathing to catch timings on the opponent, and that's for next week. But my biggest tip for anybody that's kind of struggling in understanding how to get that perfect time to get space, that timing, is to look at how much control you have had and how much time has passed. Usually, the enemy team will always expect within 30 seconds of the round to expect an attack. If you use those first 30 seconds to push out, you're probably going to expect a fight in those first points of contact. So you're not going to get a really big chance to really push up. However, if you push even at an even higher, if more time passes, you can use that time right there to instead use what you haven't given them. Okay, so for players that are really slow, or for players that have to, have gotten stuck playing slow, I would recommend wait 30 seconds, maybe 20 seconds if you're that impatient, and then from there you can kind of start taking space. Okay, that is perhaps the perfect time for you guys to take space because you've gotten a reaction from the opponent. You've seen what they do. They're not doing an early attack. They're not getting orbs. Maybe they are getting orbs. You haven't heard any noise. They haven't taken any shots, no smokes, something like that, right? If you've seen nothing like that, then you can start looking at, okay, maybe it's time for us to start poking, right? And that's the perfect time for you to take space. Perfect time to start contesting space, okay? If you do it within the first 20 or 30 seconds, then you're playing more aggressively. You want to make sure that you're using your poking, right? Make sure you're pre-firing corners, you're using utility, and you're taking it as quickly as possible. Because what's happening is, if your push gets halted, let's say on attack, and they throw a smoke down, well, the enemy team is going to know where you are, and you're going to potentially lose space that you already had. Speaking of like the half, the little half that you can use to kind of break it down, okay? Try to always kind of identify after 30 seconds where half of the team is. Sometimes you might not know. You have to make a call. They started on B. I haven't heard anything on A. 30 seconds have passed. I pushed a little bit. Nothing happened. That means they're still on B side. Okay? All of this is still over there. They're still by tiles. They're probably still over here by like main and lobby. They're over here by main. Okay? You can make that assumption. Okay? If you're more aggressive, you can actually start taking more space, maybe potentially take the spawn, and then from there you can kind of start making more deductions. They're not in spawn. I kind of checked over here. They're not even here. That means that they're still stuck in this area. And this is the best place for you to catch timings on defense. And on attack, it kind of works the exact same way, except that it requires fakes, it requires utility and coordination. I might do a more of a conditioning and fakes class for that, but the same topic still stands. I would suggest that you guys try to use utility to kind of fake the opponent out. And then after you've drawn enough fire, you can kind of look to see if you guys can catch an opponent off guard. Okay? Don't try to catch timings on defenders. Usually you can only catch them if you know they've rotated off. So that one's kind of a gut feeling. Okay. So here's some advice for anybody that needs to kind of work with it. Like I said, I've already shown you guys from like Demon 1. You just have to make the call and you just have to go for it. Okay. That guy felt really confident in his skills to push up. He just does it. Okay. If you feel like you have the aim to do it, try it. Because at one point in time, you're going to realize that the elo that you're currently at is not that smart. And you're giving them way too much respect. Okay. Sometimes they're not going to do what we saw over there with the sky. They're not going to wait that long. They're actually going to be pushed up and be made. And you can catch someone off guard, right? You can do that a lot of times with many different ranks. The only ranks that I would say are a lot harder are probably Immortal. But that's when you need to start relying on your team a little bit more. Oh, I threw a flash out. Nothing's being made. Okay, I'm going to push spawn, right? Communication like that really, really solidifies that. Any other tips that I might just give on anybody that's struggling? Work on your movement, okay? There's a lot of times that I find players that have a hard time identifying when they should pull out their knife or not, okay? The best place for you to push with your knife is if you know that space is clear. Don't just move in a straight line. Don't try to like catch people off guard just because you think you can run, okay? Have your gun out at most of the time. The only times you would use the knife is in little moments where you want to increase your speed just by like a couple seconds, right? Not really enough to justify pulling your knife out if you're trying to get space, okay? I find players try to just pull out their knife when they're trying to take space fast. There's no reason to. Have your gun out. Anybody could be out there at any point in time. And again, trust that gut. If you feel like you're pushing out here and you've been here for too long and your brain is telling you to back away, just do it, okay? It is a coach's call to tell you, no, you should have kept going. Instead, just trust it. If you feel like you're going too far, that's your brain telling you you've done this before and you've gotten punished. Instead, maybe try to see if you can hold that space like we saw this guy do. Sometimes you can hold space back there and it's just as effective because you're still holding that space. You still have map control. Okay. So look at it that way and you should be fine. Try not to judge yourself too much if you're not an aggressive player. Okay. Do we have any questions before I close this off?
I have a counter argument. I feel like if I spend $50 on a knife, I gotta pull it out, you know? It's like when I'm running around.
I can't argue with facts, dude.
Yeah.
I can't argue with
that's
facts.
real.
I cannot argue
Yeah,
with
thank
facts.
you.
You're right.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm actually
I
not
have a
gonna lie to you.
question.
I'm just gonna say it just to expose myself a little bit. When I bought the Kuronami, I died so many times. It's because I kept
I
pulling it
wonder
out.
why.
I just kept pulling out the knife. I just love the animation, and I think you know how open it is sometimes. I just kept getting
Yeah.
caught off guard. I was like, why did I do that? It's like, but pretty knife. Again,
Bro, the Spectrum bundle is so like every time I pull out my knife, I'm like, I want to play music.
no, I
Exactly,
get that
see?
too. I had the
I know what
sticker
you
for it
mean.
too, like the spray. Okay. Any other questions? Any other things you guys want me to cover over? You guys have a little bit more time.
Yeah,
left. Go for it.
I have a question. So when you're like poking, right? Like if you're poking the enemy, right?
Mhm.
And they're like not giving you anything, what do you do? Do you just poke more or you just
You
like
scale. If they don't
you
give you
scale?
anything
Okay.
here, then you can start scaling. Again, that's why I
Okay,
said
that
poking and
makes sense.
scaling work hand in hand, but poking is for those players that want to remain aggressive without fully just sending it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at an aggressive
Yeah.
team, they just run this down. They just have the